In this episode of the SketchUp Show, we use SketchUp to evaluate light and shadows. We're going to start with a remodel project that we did a little while ago out in Palm Springs. Now, seeing as how the project is in Palm Springs, evaluating light and shadows was really important. I've gone ahead and stripped out all of the shadow information that we had originally in this file, and in this tutorial we're going to kind of show you how to get all that information back in there. So for starters, when you're working on a project in SketchUp, by default the shadows are turned off. So the first thing that you're going to want to do, if you have the shadows toolbar up in your top toolbar, you can just click on the little button. If you don't have the shadows toolbar up there, you can right click, select the option for customize toolbar, and then you can drag the shadows toolbar up into the top toolbar. Now that's if you're on a Mac. If you're on a PC, you can go up to view, toolbars, and there's a toolbar specifically for shadows that you can add to the top to get that stuff to show up. Another option is you can go up to window, shadows, and that'll open up the shadows dialog box. There's a little arrow up in the top right corner that you can click to minimize the extra options or to show the extra options. We'll work with the shadows dialog box for the rest of the tutorial, so make sure that you have that open. So this first checkbox obviously allows you to turn the shadows on. Then you have an option to adjust the time of day and the day and month of the year. Something to keep in mind is that SketchUp doesn't take into consideration daylight savings time. So in those later months, if that's an issue, you want to make sure to just keep that in mind, and if you're looking at the time slider, adjust that time so that the time is accurate. Below that, you have options to adjust the darkness of the shadows. You can see this is affecting the actual dark shadows. So if that slider is way over to the left, you get really dark shadows. If it's way over to the right, those shadows actually start to disappear. You also have a slider to adjust the brightness of the highlights. So if this goes over to the left, the whole model kind of dims down. If it goes over to the right, those sunspots, those highlights will get even brighter. Below is the checkbox that we talked about a little bit earlier. It's a trick that we use for interiors. When the shadows are completely turned off, the general shading for the model tends to look a little strange. This checkbox that says use sun for shading is an option that allows you to control the default shade values by adjusting the time sliders without actually having to cast any shadows. In this case, we're actually going to concern ourselves with the shadows that are being cast, so we'll uncheck that and turn on the shadows dialog box. But that's just a good option to consider when you're working on interiors. So when we're working with shadows, the two most important things to take into consideration besides the time and the date are the north angle and the location. By default in SketchUp, the north angle is the solid green axis direction, and the location by default is set to Boulder, Colorado. If you want to change either of those values, you can go up to the top of the screen under Window and select the option for Model Info. You'll see under Model Info that there's an option for location, and the location information includes the actual city and country and the north angle. So here you could choose from any number of different countries, and each country has a big long list of cities associated with it. Now, if for some reason you're working in a city that's not in that list, or a country that's not in that list, or if you just want as accurate information as you can possibly get in terms of latitude and longitude coordinates, you can either click on the custom location button and enter in that latitude and longitude information yourself, or what I like to do is get that information from Google Earth. I have the location or the site from this project open in Google Earth. It's this house right here is the one that we worked on the remodel for. So what I can do is zoom into that, double check that I double click the north angle so that north is pointing up, and double click the tilt option so that the site is flat. And I can come back over into SketchUp and select the option to import that current view from Google Earth. Now this will just take a second, and as soon as that terrain comes in, you can see that the terrain comes in so that it's automatically oriented. This whole satellite photo, this whole terrain is automatically oriented so that it's going along the default north angle, that green axis direction in the SketchUp model. So what I can do now is select everything else. I'm going to make sure and turn the roof on so that I actually rotate the roof with it. I can select everything else and move everything else in the model over and rotate it around so that now the house is actually aligned to the site that we imported from Google Earth. We can move it over again and maybe rotate it just one last little bit here to get that to line up perfectly. Okay, move it over so that it's in line with the existing footprint of the existing house. And now I can go back into the layers menu. If I want, I can turn that Google Earth terrain off. I can just hide it for now. And I can also turn the roof off so we can go back and look at that floor plan. And now we can evaluate these shadows based on real north angle information and real latitude and longitude coordinates. So again, if I go back to shadow settings, I can adjust the time of day and the day and month of the year. And now we know that we're working with that information that was imported back over from Google Earth. Now, saving shadow settings is another thing that you can do. In that case, in order to do that, I'm going to open up the Scenes palette, and you can access that under Window, Scenes. And in the Scenes window, you can see that there are a bunch of options to save the different parameters of your model, including the shadow settings. So all we need to do is click on the little plus icon and select an option. Since this time of day is earlier in the morning, I can select an option here, and I'll just type in 8 a.m. and hit enter. I can adjust the time of day specifically to be 8 o'clock exactly, and then I can come back over and update that scene. So now this scene in the model is set to 8 a.m. If I were ever to change the time of day, I could always just come back and click on that scene and go right back to a setting in the model where the shadows are being cast at 8 o'clock in the morning. I could also save another scene later in the afternoon if I wanted to set this to maybe 5 p.m. and create another scene. So I'm going to add another scene. I'll call this one 5 p.m. and hit enter. Now we can actually toggle back and forth between these two scenes to see what the shadows are going to do, how the shadows are going to animate or track across this site from morning to afternoon. So that can be helpful. This animation is something you can actually export from SketchUp if you go up to File, Export, Animation. You have a bunch of options there as well that you can look at. So a couple of ideas for you, whether you're working on shadow studies of a floor plan or whether we're actually taking a look at the roof. With the roof on, we can sort of do the same thing. We can see how these shadows are going to work in the afternoon or the evening, any day, anytime. As always, if you have any questions about this episode, feel free to check us out on our website, www.go-the2-school.com.